I'm gonna say it. The DRZ 400 is probably the best bike you can buy for around $3,000. Sorry, the best dual sport bike you can buy for around $3,000. Let me explain. So I've owned a lot of different bikes. I've had a few street bikes. I've had a KZ440, a FJ09. I've had an Africa Twin, a Tenere 700. I've had another DRZ 400 before this. I had a WR250R, actually two WR250Rs, KLR 650, DR 650. The list just goes on. I've had a lot of bikes, more than what I just listed. I always come back to the DRZ 400 and the WR250R. They're just kind of like the jack of all trade bikes. I know the DR 650 has a huge following too, but it wasn't really my favorite bike. I didn't really enjoy it that much, particularly because I'm 6'7", 275 pounds. The DR 650 is physically a very small bike. So that's one reason I didn't really care for it all that much. Why is there not a WR250R sitting here? You can't touch a WR250R for under $4,000. That's why you don't see one sitting here. Put into a pretty unique situation where I had a CRF 450 RL before this bike, and due to some unforeseen financial circumstances, I was kind of forced to sell it. But I wanted a bike again. I didn't want to be bikeless. I wanted to enjoy my summer having a bike. So that's what brings me back to a super cheap motorcycle. So here we are, back on another DRZ. DR 650s and DRZ 400s are kind of like the cheapest bikes that I could find on Marketplace. This was by far the cheapest, cleanest DRZ 400 I found. I picked this up for $2,800. It's a 400 SM, so it came with the Supermoto wheels. I'm not a big Supermoto guy, don't really care for the wheel set, don't really care how they feel on the road. So I sold those for $700. But obviously at $2,800, this needed some things. It was clean as is, it was rideable as is. Why the DRZ 400 is superior to a lot of bikes on the market is because the DRZ 400 has excellent geometry, like a very good chassis, and that in my opinion was ahead of its time in 2000. This is a 2006 model. And obviously the geometry of this chassis is outdated nowadays, but it's still a very good chassis for what it is. Plus this chassis is robust. This can take a beating, it can handle a lot of weight, it can handle huge jumps. Secondly, the suspension. The suspension on the DRZs are stout. So like a fact that like this bike came out and it had all of that stuff, like the year 2000, like this bike would have like turned the world upside down really if you think about it. Obviously I was just a kid then. I think I was probably about 8 years old. I wasn't thinking of this bike. I didn't even know it existed at that time. Plus the chassis is much bigger and suits my bigger frame better than the DR 650 does. So yeah, that's kind of my reasoning. Why I'm not including other bikes like the XR650L, which I've ridden an XR650L. The XR650L, despite being a really tall bike, is actually really cramped. KLR 650, kind of in a class of its own. It's a little bit too heavy to be compared with something like this. Like CRF 300 or KLX 300, I'm not even going to consider those. They're too soft. In my opinion, the suspension's too soft, they're just too small, they're just too cheaply made for me. The DRZ 400 is just a better built bike, in my opinion. I would rather have one of these than either of those. But yeah, after all the mobs I have into this and selling the Supermoto wheels, I have about $3,300 into this bike. Pretty damn good, I'd say. Plus this bike looks killer now. This bike looks amazing in my opinion. Like this is dream status of how a bike looks. I love black on black, but obviously the green handguards kind of fudge it up, but I can't really control that. That's all they had in stock. Yeah, as I said, I have a build list. I'll link it in the description below if you guys are interested in watching that. But yeah, the DRZ 400 is a killer bike, and if you can snag one around $3,000, do it all day. Take one of these over a CRF 300 or KLX 300. Right, there's no other dual sport that's really in the DRZ's class. Really, the only bike that could be compared to it is the WR 250R. I guess you could compare the CRF 450L to it, but the CRF 450L is more comparable to like a KTM 500 EXC. But these things have power too. Like, I mean, you're talking like DR 650 power in a package that's like 50 pounds lighter. So choose this. You won't regret it, especially if you've never ridden a bike before. Great beginner bike, especially if you're taller. Wheelie monsters too. I'll include some clips of that as well. Thanks for watching, guys. Appreciate y'all watching. Comment any questions that you have, concerns. Like the video if you like it, dislike it if you don't.